don't forget to get there's an extension outlet with it.
Okay. How's it going?
How are you?
You know, I'm glad this is the last one for today.
You know, and I wish the last one was the last one. Yeah.
We got a little bit of time.
Yeah, so this season in general.
Yeah. In the morning, got to Charlotte.
That's how I felt.
Charlotte to
I got second win. Got second win from yesterday, and then this round hit, and I'm
Cousin.
All right, y'all. Have a good day.
Have fun.
Fat people see 10, man.
I don't know if that's a thing.
It's like expressing here.
You need electricity, or I don't use that. Oh, that's up. Yeah, you were blessed.
JV's good.
Good, and y'all are.
It's me.
Oh. We good this thing.
I can hear Matt reading this to you right now. Good for him.
I'm good, my bad.
Is everybody done?
The infrastructures of habitability that make and maintain petrolines are also infrastructures of the possible making fossil fuel intensive ways of living coextensive with genocide and anti-blackness. Colonial petromasculinity structure who gets that featured and who is subjected by the dream of modernity is one of mobility. Colonial anti-blackness is a spatial infrastructure that mobilizes whiteness away from black and native space in the form of white flat while allowing free movement through them. The highways that split up black neighborhoods and the reservation. Mobility is intrinsic to the white model of the good life. It's thoroughly statutory freedom that limit the possibilities that are even imagined for subjects of petrocapital. Colonial production of space is made possible by it makes possible solid forms of life and futurity. Oil is the fuel of the U.S. racial empire's future, but materially and ideologically making possible a collective urban imaginary vicinity built around livability and environmental production for whiteness and whiteness only. Energy production is the spatializing logic of gender colonial mobility that produces freedom for some and confinement for others. Petroculture is the socio-ecological fabric that produces a white present and future. Simpson 20. No combining contribution of space more than oil, cheap oil, and new suburban developments, the outskirts of use, finance, freeway, infrastructure, possible landscapes, extend racial settling, colonialism, gender, labor, and accumulation, erase that indigenous presence, expand the racial segregation, we need cities and suburbs, suburbanization, describe that gender spheres of labor, urban sites, medical, lake ties, and landscapes, infrastructure, structure, white dispossession, racial, gender-based finance, exploitation, land and labor, resistance, spatial organization, production applies to oil, it's mentioned commodities, that global oil, essentially to give shape to high short carbon capitalism, and commodity circulation, produce urban formulas, senior reinforce settler, colonial power, global settler capital terms, the founding expansion, reserving and toxic geographies, those black and space where life is not possible from the nuclear power plants and the black neighborhoods and the pipelines that cross the reservation, petrol communities, simultaneously toxic and enabling not urban bodies, oil flow, and management of populations, urban justice unfolds with cruel opposites of petrocapital double mind, hope and thus experience of social reproduction under conditions of toxicity and crisis. The carbon form of modernity ties toxicity to the carbon intensive infrastructure of colonial urbanization. Carbon form animates our social ontological present and is inextricable from the future that it makes possible and impossible. It's not just decarbonization and energy infrastructure, business planning, carbon form itself itself needed to break the norms. A cover modernity about to perform our affective orientations, wire signals, concrete borders, bodies, and worldviews. The price of carbon is the lungs of black women and children. White anxiety that projects itself into our research burdens. The toxic neighborhoods need cops and then to fill the dead air. The clean ones need more solar to save the panicking white man's future. The racial capitalism thus thrust the burden of making non-toxic space onto bodies that are themselves deemed toxic. Likewise, attachments to clean energy are always subtended by the world's dirty work of socially reproducing clean green space to be inhabited by clean white bodies. Burgess 21. Every day in the urban center, black and brown women clean space for patriarchy, neoliberalism to function, the inhale toxic chemicals increase their COVID in the same hours of bourgeois bodies, trying to maintain a healthy, cleanly body, essential jobs are created by people who cover their responsibilities. Precarious lives of the company, middle class, the world of powerful rest, representation of cleanliness, dirty construction, racial specialization, the legacies of colonial urbanization, externalization, polluting industry, increase the feeling of cleaning is possible, the clean, dirty, vicious, and military section, gentrification of poor people, color driven, and the neighborhoods that make the city clean, toxic geographies, make space and place in endless series of graveyards for black and indigenous bodies, the poisoning of water supplies, the structurally debilitated slaves in the plantation, and the dumping of nuclear waste on indigenous lands are connected because black and native death are together white-watering projects that inject energy into the death-dealing infrastructure of the white nuclear family. Black fungibility is the raw energy that powers the world. Fungibility exposed blackness always moving enables projects of black species outside the human space necessary for the production of human places. Red Fawn falls in and trapped by the FBI during the No Doubt protest offers a look into what is concealed when we are seduced into energy features that are already possible. The Dakota Access Pipeline promised the steady flow of oil and access to the good life which the fantasy of the white nuclear family depends. That static reservation became the dirty landscape of native life where the dangerous externalities of carbon capitalism could accumulate in the bodies and lands of the Lakota people. Body and land themselves became toxified in reality. Would have been silenced if not for the thousands of people who put their bodies in the way of extractive energy machinery. Red Fawn was trapped by Keith Harmon, who was paid $2,000 to begin a relationship with her at the protest and informant her to the feds and had planted a gun in her prior to her arrest in the camp. When he caught a rape, she sat back in the same tent. Also, Phyllis Young and a diamond ring in her figure. Anti-I'm in love rape culture is latent in every part of petroviolence. That rape violates black and native flesh in order to make petro-capitalist space possible in the matrix of settler colonial. Anti-black murder, sexual violence is racializing and gendering, marking black and native women as objects for expropriation. Rape is a tool for the production of subjecthood for Western man, a weapon of warfare primed against the non-human cookies or modes of life where white humans have actualized nature, making the Indian non-human the black slave. Property is bodily descriptive, sexual, and animus violence. The intimate violation of blackness and indigeneity is inseparable from the pipeline and the renewable plant. Texas visible as a market indigenous women is inherently viable. The indigenous lands are being appropriated for extraction, accompanied by man camps or increased incidence as sexual violence takes place. Blackness and indigeneity are intertwined, a series of flows that are connected at the site of the colonial plantation, the pipeline, the highway, the suburb, the halls of government. Unnamed murder and disappearance is a condition of legitimacy for the U.S. racial state. Instead, you must presence that violation because conquest alienation must give a signification. The violence remains unnamed and extrajudicial performance and modes of living confound the normative modes of concealing violence must coexist with this grammar of black and indigenous protests and exceeded human intelligibility, like going revolt across the murder, disappearance, and black women, native women, black women, trans people, and all black life forms. So Trump's re-election lays bare a truth that was always present at the heart of the U.S. racial empire, that is, the United States as a project of the colonial plantation that ties petromasculinity to white kinship. The problem is that liberals have taken for granted that because Trump has agreed that any Democrat should be an obvious choice. It's egregious to think that one is entitled to a Democrat candidate is both. The thing that both liberals and conservatives have in common is the desire to make white space habitable as a purification of blackness and indigeneity. Trump is a realization of the disillusion with the notion of America's equitable jurisprudence. The racial state will not save you regardless of which the imperialist war hawks are chosen. Not much would change for the material conditions of the poor folks of this country. Calls to retool the state or advance rights are not only a shameless investment in settler master power, but also entirely unthinkable in our current moment. When production of white kinship is also an internal process that polices the boundary within whiteness itself. Whiteness is an ideology of purity that washes out not only the toxicity that surrounds it, but also toxicity that inhabits whiteness itself. The difference between each side of the aisle is the collapse. Liberals are calling for the deportation of Latino and black voters that did not vote for Kamala, and Kamala's inability to commit to protecting dolls proves trans people proves the dolls would have kept dying regardless of who was in office. You cannot repair a system in which its very foundation is exploitation and death. And with that, the masses spoke. You should refuse the false bargain in the white political. We will all die fighting. It's only a question of what you're willing to die for, because this shit is killing you too, however much more softly as the earth implodes under our feet. Black and indigenous bodies themselves become sites of extraction that produce a condition of possibility for a Western man. So what does it mean to move towards the end of the world and prepare for another? I'm comfortable with the end of that production of systems across our governments that can move toward the apocalypse. Is a structure, not an event. Apocalypse has been in effect for black communities since its like just a gap in the mass genocide of indigenous people. That apocalypse is not a catastrophe with no author. Apocalypse must be thought as a structural condition that tames black and native life for the sake of extraction. So what is left in the world, hell-bent on the elimination of bodies as resources? The only answer is to sit with and in the end of the world. Energy justice should be articulated from politics of unsustainability, recognizing the injustice already embedded in energy system. Energy is ideologically, materially, physically manifesting energy system underpinned by historical, political, spatial factors and reproduce racial hierarchies, class struggles, and gender imbalances. Debate is apocalyptic and uninhabitable for black, native, trans people, and girls. Constructions of whiteness that produce energy for the extraction of life and clearing of land. White anxieties about the end of the debate stem from the need for preservation that is rooted in a constant nostalgia crisis of a what used to be, which is only possible through the marking of black and native space and bodies as toxins to be captured and policed to produce white habitability through anti-black regulation. This is their apocalypse, not ours. Never to practice white futurity, child slavery, and settler colonialism, justify development, humanistic discipline, return to hold of what not to look like democracy, the individual science reform, becoming common sense cells, common sense cells to imagine the future, Lumo's ability to imagine other ways to reproduce the violence that even if progress is achieved, policing imaginary disciplining the radical China to diagnose the problem using the same stories that constructed the only way through is to begin with the question of what futures do we value, who sets the limits of the impossible. When confronted with those futures, those limits, the impossible, our only choice is to end them. Energy of structure need to be kept to a minute's interpretation. You can't have knowledge systems unless you're pedagogy engaged with the opposite. It's other former system of infrastructure designed to disarticulate social imaginaries from territory to destruction. White debate has set the limits and the terms for the end of the world that is only made possible through the demand of our dads. Black feminism teaches us that some world endings are necessary for the more collective world building to take root. We must set new demands as a practice for building this world as it requires different cycles, different imprints, different conversations, different relations of carbon. We need a new plan for how to live. Form transition must be more than energy transition, but about mineralogy, ontology, starting with the infrastructure of the impossible rather than possible, versatility and fugitivity across like a native geographies in the Yankee salts of North Carolina, uninhabitably able to transform the captivity, shortening the life institution, less fungibility to become grapple play. And while we still have it, we must live this life in rehearsal, knowing what is to come and building a new rehearsal. It's not just temporary practice of general life expanding practice of recreate, embodying and act colonialism is constantly reproducing, morphing and self-rehearsals, reflect that morphing, foreclosing logics of racial capitalism is necessary if we bring worlds that support intentions of life and life of the planet. Thus, we affirm uninhabitability as a clean and dirty energy policy for decarbonization that refuses the fixity and boundless of settler colonial anti-black practices of space making to transform the terms of the possible. Make it trick 13. Black life covers the mode of being human, it's not to possess wholly alien land, redefines the terms of who we are, the honors, relations, versus humans, our place meant to resist this illusion, narratives that witness destruction, our place to turn the brutalities of our world. Decolonial poetics identify and show to aspects of life and then death, not just biological and a pathway to honoring life to replace the absolute others are. Geography surviving resistance, creativity, and struggle against that conception that accepts our relations of violence and vision, alternative future we witness our difficult present, think the plantation differently, that dying as a way to identify violence, you mean no one's 60 index of the reality, social universality and vision. Life on the edge of geography, this demands you say a life that threatens you of living just enough as a political location or fosters more ultimate geographic practice or attention to the intimate violence that is subtense carbon infrastructure also makes space succeed the erotic chaos of decolonization and abolition. The erotic is more expensive, normative notions, the only human experience of political discourse, opposite of social death, unmooring through erotic course beyond the space of the sovereign self and by space. The experience of unmooring and judges future that hinges on the tenuous of being beholden on others and determining one sensible life, a space where black and indigenous people are beholden to one another. I'm good.
Okay, my first question, what does it mean to affirm uninhabitability?
Yeah, uninhabitability is an orientation towards the world and its unsustainable mode of living. Our argument is that it encompasses a couple of things. The first internal link that I point you to is the rehearsal step. Rehearsal is a mode of adaptation to capitalism as it adapts to us. So our argument is that capitalism is flexible and fluid and is able to adapt to us. Rehearsal is a mode of creating new forms of politics, tactics that adapt to that. Yeah.
Is that you two adapting to capitalism?
Well, I mean, those that are in, taking up uninhabitability, but it's more than just us.
You seem to indicate there are more internal links.
Yeah, the second one is the erotics argument, which is the last thing that I just read. The erotics argument is a way for us to organize across lines of difference. It says that we should unmoor ourselves and be completely uprooted by the process of decolonization and abolition, such that we are able to kind of, organize across lines of difference for a collective future that is not defined by the question of white futurity and the sustainability of a white world.
Does the judge's affirmation create, organization?
Well, I don't think that's necessarily the burden of absolvency. Our argument is that an affirmation of uninhabitability is just that. It affirms that uninhabitability is a good praxis and a good, orientation towards the world.
What is blackness?
What is blackness? Well, we think that a couple of things. One, we think that blackness is tied to the question of enslavement and genocide. So the argument here is that white futurity has constantly rendered blackness into something as fungible matter that is used to produce new space for itself, i.e. the ways that, for example, black neighborhoods, nuclear power plants are placed in those neighborhoods which simultaneously toxify and dispossess those people, but also create moments of clean energy so that whiteness and the suburbs can sustain themselves.
The 1AC mentions decolonization a few times. Do you defend giving land back to indigenous people?
Well, so we probably impact turn that. Our argument is that that focus on land back as the ends, politics of ends, betrays the erotic, which is a politics of means. Our argument is that we must focus on the erotic as a way of producing those connections in order to create that liberatory horizon in the first place. But the end point of the app is the complete deplatforming of United States racial state and its sovereignty and the settler colonial project in general.
What is the carbon form of modernity?
Carbon form is not simply just the material production of things like energy or oil, but is also, our evidence says, a social and ontological thing, i.e. it is the ways in which the energy production kind of makes futures possible and impossible. So this is kind of the example that I gave earlier about like nuclear power plants in black neighborhoods. That makes black futures impossible while simultaneously making white futures possible.
The last question I
Just an
wanted to
example
ask,
of before, but it's more than that.
what, if any, ontology claims does the YNC make?
Well, Rita?
I think that it's a question of not only the way in which blackness is like construed and viewed in debate, but also the way in which blackness is used for extraction. We think that we have made claims about the way in which extractivism, is always something that blackness is being disposed to in reference to the top.
Cool. It's gonna be one in that case. Do a send out.
How many ounces did you say?
Just one, in case.
Okay. What was that?
Yeah. And so I didn't click this out. That'd be awesome.
No,
we
it's
good.
I have it.
One sec, I'm done.
Yes.
You did that last round, just didn't hit the send button.
I mean, it's fine normally, but at the NDT, it's like,
Is it on?
Roy, come on. Is anyone not good? Cool. I'm gonna start. First off is T interpretation topical and affirmative defending you must have a defense of the United States federal government adopting a clean energy policy, including a market-based instrument, and results means form resolution or vote Marine 7. Instead of declared by form resolution voting, the USFG has 3 branches: U.S. legal entity, United States federal government, legislative caucus, executive compromise, president, vice, judiciary, and adopt requires legal force, MRMD, the term adopt refer to formal approval of the Fed. Was voted to adopt the resolution, and the clean energy policy requires a legal framework, Housekeeping 23. Clean energy policy is a rule of framework enacted by the government to determine how renewable energy regulated management and incentives for production and use of low emission sources in the form of tax subsidies, infrastructure, improvement, efficiency standards, and measures to disincentivize fossil fuels. A market determines a carbon tax or cap and trade. Also intent a market distributor puts a price on GHGs either via tax or cap and trade. And vote neg if they don't meet it versus fairness. Absent defendable limits and debates give it an incentive of race. It creates a race to the margin, which distorts topic research and makes it unable to be negative fairness. Interest in good income. This first debate is against negation and competition, and second is class. After the a predictable stasis point in debate only our model ensures a vibrant debate and in-depth clash, but it's untenable to prepare for unpredictable frameworks outside parameters of the resolution. Maximizing clash is key to deconstruct complex issues and find solutions to actualize the benefit of the game. Case. You should vote neg on presumption that before the action of the app may be enough to resolve their impacts, but winning doesn't validate their truth claims. So it isn't key to their strategy because judges decide on arguments they don't agree with all the time. Voting app doesn't materially change systems outside of this round, even if the starting point doesn't go anywhere. And ask must resolve the material harms presented through the 1AC is the best because the 1AC has shifted the locus of the critique, which is creating a burden of absolvency. Visco 19 critique without alternatives and resolve the question: how did the critique and to bring social changes become detached from social reality, bound to logical rearticulation, and theoretical narratives grounded on theoretical premises which normally appear because it did not feature yet. And it remains unfinished, offers an alternative lacking expanding critique to include societies affected by liberal authoritarian regimes. And critique is a main flaw in insufficient elaboration on alternatives. Such ideas that fail creative policy making, power holders, and institution regimes. If goal is emancipation, alternatively is essential for a different possibility grounded in the conceptual and empirical alternatives. And petroculture relies on affect. Affect isn't a basis for politics, and no recourse for dealing with atrocities. Turn 15. Deconstructive work yields only one fragmentation. Affect cannot formulate a coherent basis of political judgment with affect intensity and the ultimate value must currently critique oppressive political structures as Nazism. The mass adopted and embrace such regimes of intensity, and they provided the effective intensity less destruction by definition without coherent structures legal to political and cultural conditions necessary for minimal exercise of freedom and are unlikely to emerge, and if they do that, unlikely to sustain the radical devaluation of relative consciousness produces freedom that signifies nothing other this and marks the defense of identity itself. Affect there is just a raw process of social subjugation to the neurobiological equivalent of a permanent origin of society. Obstacles stand in the way of the affective emancipation, constraints of evolution, the biological programming of the angling of itself, the purity, affect intensity helps keep it free as social significance. Affect can never symbolize it, which means it can never be organized. If they want to eat their cake and have it too, have enough for all suffer from lack of explanatory power. We cannot know what affects, so we cannot control the flows and their impacts. And on the price of carbon set the No. The racial capitalism first, his response to racial capitalism should focus on constructive approaches that change power systems. Time 22 responded to the problem of elite capture and racial capitalism enables no difference politics to constructive politics and constructive approach because the outcome over a process to pursue specific goals rather than the mere avoidance and complexity and justice. Pragmatic optimism starts with where we are open imagines what we want to be finding Texas shift common sense concerns with building institutions calibrated itself directly redistribution of power to world making project aimed at rebuilding our actual structures rather than bureaucratic systems as the ones they already have for the people who want to see different outcomes. It is not a guide, rather it intended to help to see certain trends and traps in the best or organizing help to respond to different contexts strategically. And racial capitalism fails to explain all instances of violence to lose 20. Racial capitalism, racist exists people capitalists and non-capitalist societies can be blamed. It inspires one to the best capitalism pushes societies away from racist behaviors. Racist thinking should be undermined by capitalism encouragement of voluntary association relations undermining the stereotypes of South non-capitalist professors of war with the Civil War segregation violated the basics in capitalism freedoms. Association consent and racism, non-expression of capitalism, but contradicted capitalism, racism are deadly enemies, and their evidence metaphorized the decolonization by creating a decolonial poetics that is rooted in movements that repatriate indigenous land and life that are provided and proves that they create a speculative future that gets co-opted. 1AC McKin 13. Jamie reads purple, not bad. Identify inventories that text the decolonial poetics that dwells on post-slave violence in order to provide the context to which the black features are imagined across the streets and narratives that are able to track the science fiction tales of democracy. The difficult opponent demands imagining sites in global structures, but in speculative fabulation gets co-opted by the alt-right and turns the Afghan for 21. Rising neo-fascist alt-right is a focus on attention to speculative fabulation. One of the worst mechanisms alt-maxims that alt-right envision themselves as ecological saviors, the codification of the genre of such communities involved and as worlding to reframe cultural identity and prefigure themselves purgation of the white racist paper will examine the alt-right right to eliminate SF political and social boundaries to domain a heterosexual white Western white male. And the metaphorical decolonization turned egoism DA, the absent attempt to purgate the intellectual rhetoric for the ballot is a self-certain ego stroking the refines the structural structures of colonial exchange turns the K. Mosaic 19. Integral to decolonization is tendency to both tokenize gesturing towards exclusion with little effort to undo coloniality and reaffirm colonial structures. Tokens decolonization would be excessively abstract, characterized by an intellectual provocation that serves the message of one ego to the expense of actually achieving intellectual decolonization. Intellectual decolonization places oneself at the forefront without any real sacrifice to develop. Intellectual decolonization be self-serving when the universities realize the marketability and commodify it. And on the extraction stuff, they have set the bar for the theory power of the extraction of black and native bodies. So if we win that extraction, Murdoch is power tied to about indigenous people. Women are harmed when resource extraction happens, but this is not true of renewables because every marginal increase in recycling directly decreases extraction. Dixon Peters 24 solar panels are recyclable. 95% of value can be recycled. Recycling initiatives are crucial to reducing waste. A circular economy. Solar panel recycle saves 97 pounds emissions. Energy storage systems are recyclable. While the battery metals are recycled. Definitely 80% of a wind turbine is made up of recyclable materials. R&D and blade recycling continues to grow in 2021. And DPRNA preventing landfill of 6,000 metric tons of materials. NDT as a nationwide partnership to recover oils along with replace recycling of scrap metals, recycling products to contribute to a circular supply chain. And the Trump argument is wrong. There are protests going on after resistance attempted to change are happening. It might not solve every instance of violence, but it still proves that the state and white citizens are trying to do stuff now. In addition to food sovereignty and land restoration are happening now, which through reformers and activist members, numerous examples on 21. A coalition of Canadian tribes around 50% of clean water seafood to control the billion-dollar seafood industry. We were granted treaty rights to modern livelihood by Canada's Supreme Court, becoming majority owners, gain full ownership of clean waters, offshore and fishing licenses, guarantee the food security, economic sustainability of the current China indigenous people are getting access to control of traditional food waste, return ancestral homes through organizing advocacy work, coalition building with legal purposes, with the tribe the security of the ancestral lands, restored to maritime habitats, cut that card at habitats. The end of the world stuff. The world is not over. There's still a value to life and therefore a value to finding things to keep people alive. Friends, family, and goals also exist. You should prioritize and reject it. The world is over for me because abandon hopes and favor of nihilism with the possibility of life and hold them to a higher standard of the debate argument that they made. They talked about only reference debate once in the entire speech. I haven't explained to you any point in how white debate has decided the end of the world. Any new articulation of the two we see justify new block articulations and imagining futures is good imagining, but the state could be in the debate is the only way to develop and learn about real world institutional change. Cooper 16. States are perceived as grave, no outcome-oriented play can provide a means of active state efforts to invention practice are important for the politics of projection of predetermined ends of the power that which makes states cannot be acquired through willing and playing and appears to be a simple play mark parliamentary stimulating process to help kids learn, but don't have the effects parliamentarians are tended to have, however skilled the academic they lack authority, the power to do so, the violence is violence playing reveals the impact of limitation, what is stimulated as aspirational concept of what it could be, recognized and possible to resolve around the desire for change.
Read this first.
You'll send this
I
out.
already did.
Shaming campaigns, lawsuits, and market pressure all avoid renewable abuses. Beginning in 23, polluted villages, electronic waste, this kind of damage localized and confined to those places where it's the damage from fossil fuels is global. Only way to reduce death is to stop fossil fuels problems of green tech. It's easier to address global mind by hand and practice called modern days. Some of your advocates reported stories of the changes begun at the BHCRC set up a tracker to investigate supplies that companies are sued. Tesla is to try to persuade that putting pressure on the mining industry. Companies looking to make mining sector heading in the right direction. Doing away with mining could cut a lifetime of millions of the world's poorest. Yeah, let's read this last part. Legal reform practices are key, discussively compact, common change, alternatives to Harvey 20. A good common strategy requires understanding both means the end of mobilization isn't a strategy, but an alternative examining the second system in the debate carbon going after them big and fast at 75 to 80% of the burden is just 20 countries that provide 4 major sources. Those are the sectors that provide a number of decision makers, those people getting real change. They're art of ignored activists. This represents a failure. Got the credit for failure. I'm good whenever.
Okay. You good?
Hmm?
You made arguments about renewables being good. Which renewables?
Sure. Solar and wind is what is.
Okay,
Yes.
so you also made an argument on the futurism thing about value to life. I'm just kind of confused about this in conjunction with your renewables thing. Wind turbines get built on indigenous lands, destroy culturally important plants, raising livestock, severing indigenous ontological ties to land. Why does value to life for Black and Native people exist under your world in the status quo now?
Sure.
How do you
First,
solve that, I guess?
sure. I guess we haven't presented an alternative frame, so we don't necessarily
You
solve
don't,
anything.
so that's just
But
not
we've read
consequential
arguments
to your
that-
impact calculus?
Well, no, we've read arguments
No,
that we.
it's not.
No. Do you want an answer?
I mean, I suppose.
Yeah, we've read arguments that we think wind and solar are recyclable, so there's significant less extraction from them, which removes the sites that you've said are uniquely harmful to indigenous
Yeah,
and Black
but I mean,
bodies.
those renewable plants
Additional-
are being placed in Black neighborhoods as well, for example, which is the example in 1AC cross-sex. Why, do you give a fuck about Black and Native value to life? I'm confused.
We think fossil fuels are terminally worse.
Fossil fuels are worse. Well, the app disagrees with both of them. Why wouldn't that be better?
Sure, we think that the app has still only identified extraction in fossil fuel communities
No,
for
it
the
hasn't.
internal. Yeah, the card you read actually is only about fossil fuels.
Well, we've also talked about renewable plants being built in Black neighborhoods and the ways that man camps will be built with renewable plants.
And we've read the McCrimmon 23 card, which we think makes the argument that there are instances of not only state reform, but
Okay, sure. The Taiwo card says constructive approach would focus on the outcome over the process. What outcome?
sure, we think that in cross-ex, you made it very clear that the app is less focused on the endpoint and more on.
I don't know. What is your outcome?
Yet again, we don't endorse an alternative, we don't
You
endorse.
don't
a political
endorse an
paradigm.
alternative? How can you say
we
we
just
need
have
to
to
focus
prove
on, excuse me, how can you say we need to focus on the outcome and not the process and then not designate an outcome?
We're using Taiwo to critique the way in which the app is
But
endorsed.
you have no
political
alternative,
action.
which means it's try or die app. That's how impact calculus works. The T debate, vote neg if they don't meet. You have no violation. You've just read an interpretation.
What? The violation is vote negative if they don't.
Yeah, but you have not said that we don't meet.
Well, no, we have an
I disagree
interpretation
with
at the
that.
top.
Yeah, you have an interpretation and you said if they don't meet, then vote negative. You have not said that we don't meet.
If this is gonna be a big thing, that 2NC is constructive. But
I don't
do
know, I
that
think
we
it just
do
proves that your model is arbitrary, because you're gonna shift the goalpost post hoc.
that. What are you talking about?
You don't have a violation.
Listen, we've read an interpretation, we think it is pretty clear you don't meet cross-sex checks, we've explained that. We think if
That's
vote
fine.
neg if they don't meet is still, oh, that is?
Do you have anything? Okay, that's fine.
940 bucks right now.
Hey, we gonna get the panel picture? No, not y'all. We gonna get this panel picture or what? All right, well, nigga, do what it do.
You say you want me to take the picture?
Take a picture of all three of us. We gonna film together. Young Black male directors and coaches and shit.
You right. Bill,
Yeah, take a picture.
How you want to say you want the picture, then designate me to do the
Because I got short arms, I can't get all three of them.
My arm's
Take a
short
picture.
too.
Just take
I can take a picture of you after the round.
We need it while we in action.
I can take one while you're in action, I can just set it.
My man said he's gonna take a picture. Go ahead, cousin, give me your phone.
I'm cleaning off my
Spit
camera.
on you?
No, because my kids always, they be like, you don't never clean your camera, it's always foggy. I'm like, what? Man,
You do got me having some funky ass selfies. I ain't gonna lie.
you ain't even doing something.
Hey, gang shit.
Food don't sleep, that's fine.
8:20. No, actually, keep on going.
Keep on.
Yeah.
8:20, sorry. Yeah, that's one.
7:50.
Excuse me. Did you smell that? What?
The cards in the dock are in reverse order. I'm going case and then T, but the cards are T and then case first, so if you just look to the bottom first and then go up.
Does the document have to be from you, Jameson?
We will see.
Is the card, is it?
I have the docs empty.
Oh,
Is it?
shit,
Good time.
okay. Sorry, hold on. I'm gonna try this again. This should work, I just did. Sorry about that.
Tom, can I get a golf for your Celsius? I'm trying to stop you.
It's like a little left, yeah, you can. Just, if you want one, I can get you.
Okay. Is the card showing up further away? Yes.
I'm good, I think, right? Yeah.
Yeah, now I'm good.
Yeah.
What's the order? My bad.
Casey,
Casey.
but the cards are in reverse order.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Habitability maintains fastest patch routes and creates infrastructure the impossible to make genocide projects of white futurism to impacts the kidnapping and murder of black and native women like red flying and fuel economies of dispossession in the face of that violence and in the imaginary of the future wars ongoing genocide violence by the state of epistemologists craft energy policy globally that enforces knowledge that makes black and native life disposable after rehearse uninhabitability refuse to make the world live based on slavery genocide by forsaking the WAF rehearse future geographies and create taxes in the face of apocalypse shit is killing you too and will continue to do so no matter who's in office no alternative me and no alternative to this means it's try or die the presumption stuff here the apropos is mass organized resistance it doesn't come first without creating a process of rehearsal this is just the ongoing study and practice of uninhabitability and commitment to black feminist politics organizing resistance and world building overcoding the affect is mad because we've defended multiple different movements such as No Dapple and the Great Disrespect being able to respond back to the gap the world of balance is uninhabitable in the face of Trump's fascism the question is what do we do to respond back to it and what worlds do we create otherwise if the ballot is not just a marker of who we want to last them out but it's a part of a larger political imaginary and indicative of rehearsal of the Montalvo evidence here they have to prove as to why this means that they solve the fungibility of black and native women in the way in which despite things like recycling this being created black and native people are still having their bodies disrespected and displaced as an example in classes where they say that there's no alternative and that it's not their burden to solve for it the app is not speculative fiction I did that above. This is an evidence Black and Native women's work as a race from the academia and are incited as long as they misunderstand the position of Black and Native women within the University of the Stock evidence concludes that state-sanctioned ontologies, disciplines, critical thought, and decolonizing positivism commitments to policy are necessary to break away from geospatial hierarchies. Wake read the state-sanctioned ontology that dehumanize the discipline of the practical alternatives, requiring situating knowledge production to be decolonized and situated alternatives, avoiding corruption by positive problem solving, epistemic decolonize the bottom up of this knowledge production to bring away from the geoepistemological hierarchies of potential to rejuvenate critical scholarship without being co-opted in the policy world. They're wrong about decarbonization because decolonization requires us to arrange our ways of feeling, sensing, and desiring the world, which is what the erotics of the app does. And so the only ego stroke themselves by refusing to contend with our analytic of decolonization of King 15 decolonization working or ways out of thinking and feeling desiring to keep us stuck. We don't have to wait other topics of the things that have been learned on the bed. How many else can predict what decolonism work will look like when require of us? I recognize when I feel the process of decolonization persevere undone no more by the idea of living in a way that requires mass death, futurism, stuff here, value life, those things, because their futurity actively destroys Black and Native spirituality, which is supercharged with their defense of renewable solar plants draining water resources from indigenous lands and wind turbines raise the earth while destroying culturally appropriate plants and killing off natural livestock, severing Black and indigenous relationships means that their futurism is an attempt to produce habitability for whiteness and reproduces dispossession. I'll do the liberalism, the rest of the cards here can be filtered under the legalism good for debate stuff. Trump decks all their solvency because he's getting the EPA and producing racialized enforcement, which is proven by the Clean Air Act because it was by him pulling the Clean Air Act because it was DEI on Cancer Alley, which is an attempt for him to murder people in Cancer Alley. Democrats are already preemptively acquiescing to him, which was only after refusal of the terms of racial capitalism and Southern colonial violence can solve all of our offense on liberalism as an impact term. It's not liberation, it's genocide by under the name. It requires depersonalized markets as somebody's exterior to the project of civil society. It requires dispossession that fails to hold liberalism accountable for the violence against Black and Native people to reify the state. Liberal progressivism relies on the rapeability and disposability of Black and Native women from the man camp to Black neighborhoods. It requires whitewashing the resistance of subjection of Black and Native bodies framework. Apocalypse from topicality, we're debating at the end of the world in debate, white anxious attempts to manifest into settler violence instead of confessing that you have something to learn from Black debate in the face of apocalypse from Trumpism. Trump is not unique, but is exemplary of the fact that only uninhabitability produces a model of debate to combat it, which means it's try or die for a politics rehearsal in the face of apocalypse. There are nostalgic for a model that was never sustainable. You should let it die. You should refuse the imposition of white debate norms on Black and Native people because that refusal itself produces sociality and resistance to the very act of living outside of the confines of whiteness. But procedures like framework on the whole of the apocalypse and the rise in white-wing fascism, DEI, dog whistling is actively erasing climate initiatives now. Is this increase of surveillance and capture of those against fascism? I mean, it's not separated from debate. It requires breaking the law in order of debate where it's already being cracked down on now. It's trying out for a model. It's right crisis attack is instrumentalist of fiat. It's a form of liberalism that only assuages that change only happens in the states of legalism. Their version of debate cannot shift crisis because liberalism is the crisis. Their skills that they produce are not separated from Trump, but are partial politics that produce Trump in the first place. No fiat or TVA in a world of fascism. Research over climate change is being deleted now because of DEI accusations in their model sees to it because they do nothing to perpetuate our current terms don't exist, which only assuages their guilt for being complicit in reduction of the fascist world. Fairness is self-correcting, and losing this round means they'll go back to the drawing board and research more, which fills in the loss of fairness and clash over time. There's no fairness paradox, even if it's necessary for the game. We buy into it too, that does not mean you should change the game's orientation. Speech times or clipping preserve a fair part of the game, but limits on what arguments we make are not inherent to the rules. We meet because farm transition is decarbonization, and climate crisis cannot be theorized without the social fabric that makes it possible. There's an instrumentality. This side switch strategies and anti-black dogma, so you shouldn't let them trick them into thinking that it's solved because we'll plan focus when they're an egg, and it liquidates Black to the predictable constraints that view Black agency as burden. That's read Bookie and Kelsey 25. Plant-based debaters argue that there is something against Black to just believe that discussions don't only interpret the negatives, even the Black debate critical arguments on the negative of plant-based to reject the engagement if Blacks cannot be affirmed in the position of us without being subject to the trade of policy making paradigm awareness, but it's an appropriate time to affirm Blackness to do it on the negatives conditional inclusion of dialogical engagement to constraints of the parameters of Blackness because we discuss an affirmative plan let's anti-Black outcomes so near suggestion acceptable forms of Black existence other than radical liberal political imaginary counterinterpretation cut that card imaginary counterinterpretations that affirmatives must defend and unstable vision of the topic debaters forfeit tactics for living and surviving the face of apocalypse because it's what animates the topic. It solves predictability because it's what makes the topic possible. Our model grounds soft grounds and lips. It takes out athletes just run to truism because every act must produce a practice at the end of the world. There must be ties to apocalypse and energy. Method debate solves all of their offense escaping critical distats. Core cage generics, Black politics, society, and competing theorizations of infrastructure produces the best ground because critical lit. It's expansive on this topic. Examples like Black feminism versus Marxist ecology, native ecology versus the red deal, third and fourth line testing is best under our model. Experimental policy rehearsal is key to iteration. Reject definition of energy infrastructure that come from settler form. The best interps preserve both ethics and education. You should treat the debate as an open side of interpretation that produces pedagogical engagement rather than producing stale, colorblind debates. Arbitrary conclusions are better than arbitrary net exclusions. Competing interps or words over limiting the expense of ethics and education. The best interpretations preserve observe both competition and ethics. They can't solve any of their internal links and clashes and did not define market-based instruments. It means that their interpretation limits the topic because no app would require a pricing instrument. I'm going to go to the definitions here. Resolve means to be determined. U.S. as black and native colonies is terrain. 1967 to the U.S. as a racist country. The the representative economy and the first was apart from Africa. The revolutionaries go back to the economic communities into black rebellions of talking for lessons of dealing with the armed resistance to our uprising. The turtle. The colonies of the U.S. is developing a consciousness of resistance. The beer should be cold and most possible. The accessible was the beer is cold adopt as we know date to bring into process or use something. Clean energy policy is the white ecology never talks about making clean energy if the inclusive externalize the white energy ecology so clean energy rests on the dumping of the poor indigenous community for its race division, meaning to help her cause something, mandating the app solve decarbonization mixed burdens of Britannica online to help her cause something. Decarbonization is a cultural project that supplants carbon cultural projects undergirded by carbon from MBA. Is Mitchell 20, the economy came into the colonized world, the development of the way of thinking about colonized parts of the world, and the imperial system, the market society, determines the rules and norms of human interaction. The market become a totality of a synonym for the economy of the abstract whole. The neoliberalism is what we recognize as conceptualizing the market as a parallel kind of abstracting. I'll go to the limits of it here. Arbitrary app inclusions or arbitrary net exclusion because there's no resolutional basis for fiat proven by their unchanging interp regardless of the topic. It turns to net ground because their ability to constantly move the topical goalpost means that the teams will always just read extremely long apps because you're going to read framework anyways. The white control fantasy decide because predictable limits the spatialization tactic that allows for the policing of black and native bodies in a debate which makes clashing over determining who creates the boundaries of what is worth clashing and debating over. They have not defined every single word of the topic, which means that the limits are arbitrary. Running to the margins proves all of our spatialization offense because the margins are the uninhabitable lever allow us to improve our research. The white debate has created the margins which over limits the topic. What would clash over matters extend the USFG counterinterpretation. Their delimit agency in the most reactionary of ways that only reads colonizers as predictable actors, which makes them the arbiters over what debates we can be having, which disavows the rich literature base and resistance of black debate. That means that TVA and suicide debate do not solve but demonstrate our impact turns. It's only can register blackness on the terms of white humanism, which causes black burnout and stops revolutionary energy. It's arbitrary because there's no metric for how much class is enough to solve the benefits of our model, but we're winning that any amount of anti-blackness or colonialism, any amount of anti-blackness and colonialism must be rejected because only we have judge instruction that is able that allows you to be able to evaluate our models. I'm going to go to more TVA offense here. Extraction to static because the TVA will be reflective of a model that requires black and native argumentation to sustain the fantasy of a multicultural debate while simultaneously using the TVA as a spatialization tactic to determine the grounds on which supplementary bodies will produce their arguments. The reblinky argument applies here. You can also cross-apply all the liberalism debate because it's internally to all of their class that we're able to have effective debates about what actually would happen in the world of debate and outside of the real world because Trump would never do the TVA because it requires as only allowing blackness to be read on their terms, which is bad and links back to all of our clash offense about making them the arbiters over what debates we can be having is bad. It incentivizes and trains violent attachments to black and native people that they cannot break down. There's no solvency because white supremacy trains them to whitewash debates about blackness and indigeneity, which is why they would just reprocess counterclaims or other T violations, which means that teams are just going to get more untopical because you keep reading topicality against them. So it means they don't actually produce a model that's actually able to respond back to whatever unfairness they claim because it only causes, they cannot stop KVK debates, they can't stop KTs, period.
Before we start cross, can you send out the switch side debate card? I don't think we got that.
It's in the, is the Kelsey card not in there? Sorry.
I didn't think
Thank you,
so.
Sammy.
Yeah, I don't see it. I
Okay,
think it's
sorry,
in the doc.
I will resend that document.
I appreciate that.
Is it just the same exact card that was on the wiki?
Yes.
Okay, I got it. We're fine.
You do, okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
sorry.
I thought that was in the original
I
document.
shouldn't have even brought this up then.
My
Sorry.
fault.
Okay, I'm good if you are.
That's great.
Well, do judges want the card?
Do y'all want the card?
Oh, I guess that's
You
enough.
guys can start crosses, but you should have it say after crosses.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want us to?
Here, I can try and find it.
Okay.
Cool. Should we start then?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Quickly, what route is it? Was it YouTube?
It's YouTube.
Cool. Reasons to reject the team.
No.
Cool. Just quick flow check. What was the second impact at the top? You said there's two impacts of the app.
Extractive epistemologies.
Extractive. Can you explain that to me?
Sure. So I think this is the answer that I gave the last time in Crosshex where we said that blackness and nativeness are always at an site of extraction to be able to, make the rest of the world work. We think that this world and the United States in general, and also the rest of the world in the way in which, global imperialism and capitalism works is always constituted through, black and native death. We think that within itself is extractive.
Cool. I think I'm a little bit confused about the different interpretations of extractive used in multiple instances in
Right, well, that's the
Yeah.
point. Extractivism is used in multiple instances because that is the condition of Black and Native life. We think that extractive cosmology such as, the land, things that are required to make renewables, how that requires, which is why I said global imperialism requires, harming places like the Congo, extracting those things, making, austerity politics in other places. All of these things are interconnected with each other, which is why we're saying that the app has a horizon to be able to describe how the land is inhabitable.
Cool. Second question, what does it mean to embrace the end of the world? You talk about this a lot in solvency.
Sure, so we think that, number one, I think this is the language of sustainability and unsustainability that the app is using, trying to make this world sustainable, i.e. solution-based focused on trying to, recuperate the effects of climate change, mitigate them, solve them, all of those things, literally sustain a world that is never going to be able to solve for those things because, that world is always constantly remaking itself through violent systems of, genocide against Black and Native people. We think that that means that you can never solve, any of the impacts of saying that, liberalism is good. All of the offenses you gave about recycling, and you're just it's able to reduce mining in some ways, all concedes that mining is still happening because the condition of Black and Native life is one of extraction.
I want to ask about the extraction disadvantage you read at the bottom. I don't know, I don't think I just got the warrant.
What do you mean, the
what is the
TPA stuff I
argument?
did, or
Yeah,
what?
yeah, I just missed it.
What, do you want me to read it out for you, or do you want me to explain it?
The second one would be better.
Okay, sure. So the TBA is making basically an indite to a lot of different arguments that I made in the 2AC above. Number one, you only place Blackness in, in conversation or only to be able to be read in reference to.
I was just asking about the disad.
Yeah, that's the
Oh,
the
sorry.
extractivism stuff,
Okay.
is that it's only able to be read and extracted from when it is convenient to you and placed on your terms instead of, the terms that we have set, which is why we said on Clash that, it is not okay to make you the arbiters over what debates we should be having, especially because you have an unlimited time.
Cool. Sure. No, I think we're good.
Good.
That covered some.
Appreciate it.
Great.
10.
Very cute.
6
How many you drive?
off work. The rest of them, because they took me, they say, they didn't, I only judged one yesterday, so I'm in for the rest.
Oh,
This happens every,
more power to you.
yeah.
I always hate round 8s.
I don't, yeah, no, it's like, there's like very specific rounds I just don't want to be in.
Yeah.
I'm like, don't want to be in 7, I don't want to be 7 for CDR and NDT, but inevitably.
Too much at stake. People be having attitudes,
Yeah.
and I don't got time for it.
Yep. You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, 3:37 left. Let's see. My order is Steve.
We waiting for somebody
Yeah,
else.
we missing.
Yeah, I know. Look at that, Celsius.
You got 48 cents in April. It's crazy.
If I start a new energy drink right now, I'll be
That's around 48 cents in April. Track.
No, I'm not. How far? I was about to ask you how far?
400.
Oh.
But it's still early. It's April.
That's real.
And she's running 47, 49 consistently. Sister might be unbeatable this year, I fear.
Okay. I do not know much about track. But
It's still early though. And Paulino, when Paulino in top shape, she not touching my bitch Paulino.
is that like world championships or is that like college or?
No, it's pro. It's Grand Slam. So they just made a league actually. Michael Johnson, he made a league called Grand Slam, and it's like certain athletes who are signed, and then they do it in the form of like 2 races. So essentially, one of them will be like your better event. So like for example, Gabby Thomas, who most people know, right? Her specialty is the 200. But like, so she's in the long sprints category. They did the 2 and the 4, and it's a mix of people who kind of specialize in those events. So it's like Gabby, her main event is the 2, but she can do the 4. But then like Paulino and Nasser, they do the 4, and they also have to come down to do the 2 for this event. And it's like back to back because the Grand Slam is over 3 days. The first day you do it, and then the second track and they can do it. And then it's like mixed between the men's, the women's, long sprints, short sprints, hurdles. It's a lot. It sounds good.
I didn't even know they had that.
Yeah, they just made it. This is their first time doing it. They're in Jamaica this weekend, and then next month they actually go to Philly, and I think I'm about to go watch that one live. I love track, so. We're talking about Grand Slam. Grand Slam track.
Our coach told us we need to see.
News to me too, it's pretty cool.
It is.
Oh, my track, you my track, cycle? Oh,
You know I ran track.
Oh, wait, for you.
that's why you so athletic.
Bro, I would have never did debate if I ain't torn my ACL.
Word, that's you so athletic.
I
That
would
makes a
not-
lot of sense. You
I
like
would-
sneaky athletic. You should go to the basketball court with a beater, some basketball shorts, a bonnet, and some slides.
Can you stop telling me?
And was putting up like 15 and 10. Bro.
Slides?
Chilling, bro.
Slides?
Slides and a bonnet.
Slap.
He was real good. Real right. All right, where we going?
I got the orders tee and I set the dock out.
Well, you know.
Get verbal, visual confirmation people and it'll be good to go.
You said you have like 3:30 left?
I put 337 in the email chat. Alright, here we go.
Topical firms must have an instrumental defense of adopting a clean energy, the United States federal government adopting a clean energy policy, including a market-based instrument clash outweighs and in turn the white control to that debate is unique because of hours of research over my computation that is an inherently productive process of self-reflexivity and advocacy skills, but can only occur with the critical space to do for debaters to in-depth research and iteration over otherwise anti-black ideologies are locked in and throughout with lack of contestation and clash become normalized and legitimized. If we control the predictability, then we control push or die because they have agreed that clash is good by going for an internal link toward fairness is an intrinsic impact of the game. Everyone's implicitly agreed by body by speech time, doing line by line, etc. Not wanting you to flip a coin to the side, internally turns all their offense as procedural fairness logicals, monopolizing like predictable limits predictable limits to evaporate any flash topic engagement that causes burnout and makes it impossible to break out of anti-black and colonialist dogma that's sedimented under their model of debate. It also straight turns black burnout offense because it heightens structural parities they've agreed on exist, which pushes debaters out of the activity. Yes, fairness paradox view are reliant on them so you can't get out of it. Competition frames their offense, not apocalypse. Ask yourself, how do you learn from black debate without debate as a prerequisite to having those forms of conversations or relationalities in and of themselves? They're wrong about Trump. Checks and balances combat him in this quo, and you should Google revolutions literally happening all over the United States today. Judges blocked injunctions, Congress repealed Canadian terrorists, repealed deportation, sanctioned Trump to bring deported people back, and the status quo revolutionary actions obviously against Trump. So this is a non-starter for them. Prefer procedural impact over anything else because they're the only thing the ballot can solve. Their offense requires subjectivities, which is non-falsifiable. It requires them to win that. It requires them to overwhelm people going for argument they don't agree with. Alt causes like religion, school, family, even if it can, the shifts only occur over hundreds of debate, which means this round is irrelevant of it, but can remedy this instance of procedural unfairness or clash, which means we have a bigger internal link to it. The liberalism impact turn will be on case, and the TVA will disprove them. They said the TVA is not likely because of Trump. This is equally as true of the apps. This is not net offense. The next argument was we meet, no shot. We've explicitly defined words in the resolution they do not meet. They violate by not meeting them. I will explain that below. The instrumentality is that I've never gone for switch side debate in my entire career. Not going to start now. No link at all. The affirmation on its own terms is solved by the TVA, and limits don't uniquely produce exclusion. Those are external features of society that aren't unique to debate, and voting app can't solve. Using a limited topic to develop provisional censures through reciprocal and fallible argumentation is a better method of exposing how those exclusions function. Dog Group 14. Deliberation leads to quickly informed public opinion and enable scrutiny of the decision-making process, including reciprocal, reflexive, sincere, and coercion for the argumentation, the condition possibility for engagement, because the of the human argumentation, identification, limits by the base of reflection, cultivation, deliberation, outside of strict procedure, to identify the function that such as research need to enhance deliberation, every argumentation that's radically democratic, conceived of public social, public opinion, scrutiny, and hold accountable political station process, and decisions that open a contestation when excluded voice service, understand the criteria for guiding the judges in the practices, the enormous self-esteem solution despite its democratic aims, motion, and inertia, ever kind of necessary feature deliberation, and make communication necessary, deliberative argument will involve exclusion and interpretation, and ensuring the arguments
subtly intentionally affecting historically specified the presupposition or implicit every argument and accountability force for a critique of exclusion, public to not normalizing disciplinary exclusion since any norm will require the constitution of subjectivity in particular ways and always already presuppose communicative structure. They simply reconstruct that critical idea to eliminate illegitimate construction within deliberation, able to reflect upon possibility for greater freedom and equality. The TVA is not forced inclusion. You can fit them on your own turn. Will be explained below. But the argument is also actually I'm not going to read that. Re-highlight the counterinterpretation links to our predictability. Often there's no inherent stable states of point other than the resolutions that was communally voted on. But there's an intellectual elitism to set Jarvis 2000 epistemological based maximalism displays competent for those in struggle. What do efforts say to the person how to self-solve war? Not predictable. They interpret no clear floor nor ceiling for action, makes it infinitely regressive and unpredictable, causes infinite non-federal agents and non-MBIs to steer debates in favor of the YAF. The unstable vision allows for non-USFG individual international action, etc. That makes it all impossible to be negged. They said KVK requires the stasis of the resolution insofar as the 1AC has to critique that as a predictable ground for the other team to disagree with. Anything else results to stale philosophical backfile checks that never get to the third and fourth level understandings of how those philosophical or literatures interact with each other. It's not arbitrary exclusion. They weren't topical. Will be done in a second on the definition debate proper. No, over limiting. It's better than under limiting because their model causes a race to the margins. That's bad because it's worse for predictability, which they've tried to internal link turn, which inherently agrees this is a good thing we should maximize. So roll the ballots, the signal tap room. Who won the debate? It is first and foremost a game proven by competitive incentives during line by line, etc., which means the ballot ought to prioritize a fair decision before potential externalities of education or subjectivities. Now, with definition debate resolved is certain OED 98 proven out in front of the. I don't know what their definition means in context of the resolution, so we get new answers when they make cross applications or explain it. The Turd 7067 card is not a USFG definition. It just says the US is racist. Our interpretation is key. It deconstructs the democracy that settlers set up, and the application for the government doesn't tie us to its legitimacy. Newman 11, making certain men think that one of the basic parts of social movements back group making session is not necessarily being working and say reaffirms legislatively on the question of the duties of how highly this goes. We're based on this. Extended US legal USFG is Congress, executive, judiciary. That's key to limited debates, and they specifically do not meet that. Should is certain and immediate. Higher 17 should have mandatory obligation to encounter an obligatory effect. The 2AC evidence is about beer. What the dropped definition? It means that ASP must defend a legal definition. They specifically do not meet this. Their definitions here explode limits. The CEP definition is about clean energy, not clean energy policy, which is a non-starter. The root cause claim is also wrong. The environment is not clean now, which is why we are literally having this discussion, which means there's only a risk of environmentalism / the TVA decreasing dumping or pollution. 4 means intended to further. Page 13 for sweeping until the forward to further forwards to bring further decarbonization. Their evidence is about architecture, i.e. methods of energy generation. Purple, that's 2AC 19 decarbonization. Third question for architecture and city questions of carbon as material foundation for architecture. We basically agree insofar as decarbonization is to change that architecture from fossil energy. Measure 20 framework focused on emission decarbonization, reducing emissions decarbonization for the entire system away from carbon energies. MBI, Mitchell's defining a market society, not MBI. Markets don't determine human action. If they do, they're inevitable. Rather, humans create markets, interact, trade, etc., which proves they're inevitable in some capacity. Moselle says MBI are pricing GHGs. The white control to add their model inevitably leads to some kind of policing or exclusion, as the counterinterpretation has some constraints, means you should throw our model out and rather evaluate the benefits of predictable limits. But the ballot can't solve their offense, even if their assessment of the world is correct. Limiting T debates and their counterinterpretation does not remedy nor change those things. The TVA, the United States federal government, should adopt a clean energy policy, like a implementing carbon tax aimed at facilitating green growth. It does not have to solve the entirety of the 1AC. If we sufficiently provide roads to the core literature-based and clash and fairness terminally outweigh the rest, view this like sufficiency framing. This also does not set a cap on form or content. I said this above. They can use whatever literature style they want. They can go for consequences or epistemology or something I don't even know how to tell you that they can go for. A framing argument. Their inherency claims at the top are all revolved around agentic capacity that oil has in creating a colonialist and anti-black violence. If we win that the TVA moves away from oil or that topical debates through decarbonization, do that, it proves that our model accesses their education and like retooling the state, or not retooling the state, rather collapsing the state in and on itself. Offense. The 1AC is a political project that seeks to deconstruct neoliberalization. That's a Bush-Hanson 15 transformation necessary for harmony, include change to the education prerequisite to overcome the quest to universalizing educate for employability and development, transforming the case over academia spread by hierarchies, and very enables them to reflect Degrowth entails breaking capitalism, space needed to change action. These within pre-existing structures, individuals cannot change the structure that we exist within structures. Not just the power, it's major change of our collective agency, judgment, desirable social structures. We relate to our own practices, observations, and experiences. I'm not going to read the more card, but if their internal link is about the representation of clean versus dirty energy and how that creates militarization to enforce cleanliness, and we win that the like pollution in of itself or the fossil fuel industry is why that happens, then the TVA directly combats, improves our model, accesses that offense by combating fossil capital at its root and changing the agentic capacity that the oil or fossil fuels allow, like capacities of violence that those oil allows for per their 1AC. Degrowth is key to reduce extraction. Woody 21, rather think of the maximization of profits, degrowth, the progressive thought of satisfaction of needs. Medical degrowth consists of moving away production of accumulating capital instead looks to satisfaction of human needs. Reformulating capitalism does not uneven extraction by linking degrowth through the extraction of resources, rapid reduction can be extremely useful for organizing a climate justice movement. The Simpson card at the bottom is the warrant for their like agentic capacity for oil arguments. The extraction dissad, the last thing I have to answer, it is not convenient to us on our own terms insofar as you can do it in whatever method you want, so there's no link.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. First, can you explain the internal link in between the TVA and the state collapsing down on itself as good?
You mean like how does the TVA cause that?
Yeah.
We think that things like fossil fuels are probably key to the government and also like American society as a whole. I think the 1AC probably agrees with this argument. So
What do you mean by collapsing down on itself? Like, do you mean the government agencies just disappeared? Are you like, what does that look like?
Well, we've made the argument that it kind of changes the like epistemological stance at which we approach understandings of what the state should
What
do.
is the epistemological stance? Like, it changes it from what to what?
It changes it from the Bush evidence says that right now the state and universities are becoming neoliberalized. They want to sort of ingrain capitalism and are pushing the interests of like fossil capital. Our argument is that degrowth is in opposition to that by not only taxing but also ending those like
Sure.
methods of fossil fuels.
What would you read against the TVA?
No.
You don't know?
No.
You've said there should be a topical version of the
I
app,
mean,
but
I
you don't
don't
know what
know
you
about
read
it.
against it, and you said that it generates competition and is better than the app, but you don't know what you read against it.
No.
No, yeah. Wow.
Like,
okay.
what ground are you using?
No, that's fine. The argument about, sorry, what is the bright line for fairness? Is it just the one that we've like that you've pointed out in this round, or are there other metrics?
I think, yeah, this round is fine.
This round only?
I don't think I'm understanding your question.
Like, do you think that fairness is like, always like situated in the reference to like how other debates play out? You said like multiple things, like we all have, community consensus over, what the topic means. Do you think that fairness like is also implicated in those things? Like, have you come to a community consensus over like what fairness is, or is it just what you said in this round?
I certainly don't think that there's like a community consensus of fairness. There might be a community consensus of norms. There's certainly community consensus of rules like speech times.
What's the
sending out
difference in
cards.
between norms and rules?
Norms are things like we wouldn't have to follow.
Okay, no, I mean in context of debate. I understand the definition between those two norms. What do you think the norms of debate are, and what do you think the rules are?
I guess like norms are things that we come to the activity. I don't know how to, honestly, I don't know how to answer this question without just saying like rules are like send your cards out, don't clip, to be honest. I don't know what you're getting at.
That's fine. No, I got it already. You need something?
No.
Okay.
Actually,
Oh.
do you have any time?
8 seconds.
So, question of federal injunctions. Why is this relevant?
Just at the top, you said arguments about the only way to combat Trump's uninhabitability. Our argument is that like revolutions in Congress and the judiciary are combating them in some forms in the status quo.
Yeah, can we take a little bit of prep?
Sure.
I'll stand up. I think I did. time we had?
I feel like there was a 7 at the beginning.
Maybe this was a 720. Is that what?
7:23.
723.
That's off the dome, so.
Does anybody disagree with that time?
7:23.
We are comfortable with that time.
You're comfortable with that time? Okay, sorry, I thought I wrote it down, starting now.
I did that.
Also, that's what I thought.
Yeah, sure.
550.
It was set. It's just gonna be case. Functionally straight down, but obviously. It's my word.
Just this.
Yeah.
I said 1 second.
Is there a dot?
Yeah. It's like 4 gold, I think, something like that.
It's like, yeah.
These chairs kill me.
I heard that.
Yeah.
I'm good now.
That's right.
Wait, feel good?
First, on presumption, nothing about voting apps spills outside this round. No movements get changed, nor does your ballot actually affirm or change anything. It's a gateway issue for them solving their offense, so it doesn't. So you can't evaluate it through try or die framing unless they prove that it spills out or cause anything that we're going to take out both the impacts of terminal defense dropped in the 2EC. Don't let them 1 hour trick you and say it was in the blocks. Block decision are made off 2EC mistakes. And try or die doesn't go after because they haven't because they argued the only thing that says that they. Because there are already movements in the status quo working to end fossil fuels and renewable extraction, as well as provide indigenous and black people rights and heresy takeouts, plus uniqueness takeouts, and the impacts that we have to our terms are reasons that Trier is going to flip and neg. First, 2EC agreed that affect is a bad thing, but tried to no link out of it, but that doesn't work because just because they didn't highlight it doesn't mean it's not their theory of power. When I see Simmons 20, deeply affected attachment to the vehicles, particular form of freedoms they afforded the age with the producer and the social, political, age, energy arrangement is sustainable. The no link is wrong. The premise of the act is the specialization produced petroculture, which is maintained through our affective attachments to things like vehicles, oil, energy economies, which are ways spatial logics are maintained. They don't defend movements. Think back to 1AC cross-X. Answers to the 1AC where the answer was for the 1AC is a process to end decolonization, but doesn't focus on an endpoint. They don't tell you what movements they induce or how a ballot for the app actually affects them. So don't let them get this movement no link thing. And then what they are. They don't have a counterexample for why modernity is other is any no. Even if they do. Factor offers no recourse for dealing with atrocity because it only offers deconstructive ideas, but not moving towards anything. We don't have we don't know how to affect change using affect, and its lack of structure means that people internalize it differently and don't actually use it to adapt it to any movements. Turns absolute thesis it fails to create a coalition point, and they can't actualize any change to their impact, and all suffer from lack of explanatory power. If we cannot know what affects are, we cannot control their flow in mind. The only thing they said was a no link, but we are obviously within the link level and the impact level, so don't let the one arrow blow up the no link or an internal or something. Decol is not a metaphor. They functionally dropped it. They dropped that the app is a move to create metaphorical decolonization. The 1AC McJourn evidence says that they are a form of decolonial poetics that creates an quote unquote imaginable futures that recreates forms of intellectual decolonization. We have critiqued King's understanding of decolonization, i.e. that its utilization as a metaphor. This is bad for the reasons that I've done above and I'm going to do below, but King's only critique in the card they read is that it's hard and difficult to actualize as a project because people have different understandings of it, and it's only a process of thinking about it. However, we are saying that the debate is a unique space in which you can engage over the process of thinking about decolonization, i.e. they could have offered a praxis in which they defended decolonial praxis, and we could have negated that, and then we could have come to an understanding with the judges about how this, via the ballot, about which way is the best way to endorse decolonization. This is key to not only actualizing solvency for decolonization, but avoids the tokenization effects. The impact is tokenization and cruel optimism. What I see, Movic says that we gestures for subverting the exclusion of indigenous folk and metaphorization and decolonization without combating the structures of power they critique. That turns case by messaging wakes the ego at the expense of achieving actual decolonization and commodification. The 1AC for the sake of the ballot, creating violence against indigenous and black populations post-plan. I might come back to the speculative fabulation turn, but the 2AC dropped state reform resistance happening now. They might have answered the liberalism stuff, but they dropped their specific examples, which you're going to prefer because not only are specific to the app, but I'll explain why I prefer it later. But it's terminal defense of the Africans that movements and reforms work. They answered liberalism, but instead it fails. But they didn't answer the 1AC Moldova evidence. Multiple examples of reform and restoration of lifeways happening now proves that it's inherently takeout to the app. I.e. proves that not only state engagement works, but that activists can work against activists and tribes can work against and within the state to actualize change. Versus coalition of tribes in Canada are about 50% share of and clean water foods gain full ownership of Clearwater offshore fishing licenses, which guaranteed some food security. Second, that a tribe worked with local community, state, and federal authority to build a salmon sanctuary and complete the largest dam removal project in U.S. history to revitalize native lifestyle. They also dropped the McKinnon 17 evidence, which proves that Chamonix campaign's resistance to law also accompanies them preventing extractivism right now. Regards legalism and Chamonix campaigns as the internal link, which proving profit motive is a good metric to reduce extractivism from consumer backlash, but also legalism is key to create suits against companies that are building renewables in abusive manners. This not only checks any offense they get off extractivism from fossil fuels for renewables, but the list of tribes that I talked about above from the drop piece of evidence proves that there are instances in which the tribes can work with the state, i.e. that disproves any offense they get on T and any offense they get on us for defending the state in any manner saying the reform is good. This is also an inherency takeout to the app because it proves that people are working in the status quo. I did that at the top, I did it above, don't make me reinvent the wheel. I don't know why I'm saying that to myself. Last on the extractivist stuff, remember cross-sex, when we asked what the app does, and both in the 1AC and the 2AC, and both times they just talked about they used metaphors such as the extraction of the body, but the specific articulation of that is the extraction of the Congo, the extraction from resources, the extraction from fossil fuels. This is the only internal the app has given you to access their impacts, i.e. the extraction of material things such as fossil fuels. But we have proved that a switch to renewables is not only good, but it's also sustainable. Dixon Peters was dropped coming out of the 2AC and proves that extra extractivism doesn't happen with clean energy because 97% of solar panels are recyclable now, and we have sustainable enough practices to generate it, and 60% of wind turbines can be recycled. This proves that not only is extraction significantly reduced, but that an endorsement of clean energy obviously reduces that. We're making arguments that the app rejects that. That is a net bad thing because it ensures that the extraction that they have outlined as bad for black and indigenous people would only continue because the app both both doesn't endorse and also rejects clean and dirty energy, which would only ensure that, no.
550.
You move.
Why do this? Yeah.
You do.
27.
Where is it? Oh, that pizza sitting there, sorry.
Okay. Is anybody not good? Jamie's good.
There's no doc, right?
No doc.
Oh, yeah, I'm good.
Casey. You good?
I'm not. Sorry, there's just one more conversation on here. It feels like it's always getting started.
Cool. Is anybody not? Sweet.
Wrote out for uninhabitability that says in the apocalypse as a refusal of coercive energy policy, the one he affirms a future geography that affirms creative tactics to survive in the face of the end of the world by connecting black and native practices flight from the ongoing genocide and enslavement of black and native women, despatialized the tactical control that carbon form enforces on subaltern bodies. The role of the ballot is to adopt a politics of unsustainability and towards a model of debate that refuses to make debate habitable for whiteness in favor of sitting with the lessons that black debate filter this through a preemptive acquiescence often on liberals, and that when dropped in the one and R, the role of the debate should be to refuse the terms of racialized fascism altogether, because recuperation of their model only invites right-wing intrusion in the face where the university already capitulated to the anti-DEI crackdowns on the university, as well as the ways that liberals at the state and the national level are already rolling over ways that they're ditching trans people or allowing the forms of IC rates to happen proves our argument that you should filter the white crisis DA through this. The judges should not respond to the threat of debate's collapse that they oppose because it renders black debate itself disposable, which is proven by the anti-DEI measures arguments that I made about the spill argument is irrelevant because it's a question of spill in, not spill out. It's a question of how we stop policing ourselves so we are able to produce debate as a training ground that allows us to create uninhabitability outside, and it creates an actionable practice to refuse the terms of racial capitalism. Now the try or die and already movements happening now is irrelevant because our argument is that they have no evidence that they are happening now. One, but uninhabitability, that's not a reason to that our orientation is bad. We have multiple examples of solvency that prove that even if there are movements happening now, we should adopt it as a general orientation, which is what you are affirming when you vote AF. Attachments of vehicles and the affect stuff is irrelevant because the re-highlight that they are reading says that white people are attached to things like vehicles affectively. Is not an example of our method. It is not an example of our politics, but regardless, even if it is, affect is terminally non-unique because affect is in all politics ever. Now the argument about focusing on movements is zero. That is irrelevant because that was the affect stuff above. The decal not a metaphor stuff they have conceded that there's more than just land back, which is the answer that I gave in 1XC cross-section. It requires a sensory unmooring of the ways that we are embedded within whiteness and the static notions of identity themselves. That is the only way to produce a liberatory horizon, which means that we are internally turning their argument about how to produce things like land back or decolonization as not a metaphor in the first place. Now the no materiality argument, we are certainly material. There are certainly examples of the AF, things like the Great Dismal Swamp, that's a collective of black and native people that was outside the productive nature of racial capitalism, or the Combahee River Collective are all examples of the AF that they have not contested the tokenization stuff. There was no warrant from it, but some native people are certainly counterinsurgent, and we should not just affirm native people wholesale because some of them are doing reactionary shit that is bad. The reform happening now stuff is irrelevant because drill baby drill and deporting indigenous people are also happening now, which they are not able to solve for it. Their reform stuff is not able to solve for murder and disappearance of black and native women, which is supercharged by the preemptive acquiescence argument I made above. It should be textured through all the arguments we made about renewables being bad because they are the ones that are defending energy transition at the expense of black and native bodies by turning things like ontological ties to land or literally murdering people with man camps. Not the argument about preventing extraction. They through shaming stuff we have impact turned it in cross-ex because their card that they are reading says that there is explicitly an acceptable amount of violence that should happen. We have refused that. The Dixon card about no extractivism is irrelevant because we're winning. That is not an answer to dispossession. Go to C.
Also, all of that impact turns topicality.
We're debating an apocalypse in the face of Trump's fascism. You should recognize that this is not an isolated anomaly, but a product of conquistador humanism and their mode of politics. Their model of debate is a mode to habitability that projects white anxiety onto debate. Marks black and native scholarship as illegible and non-productive. White crisis DA imposing the burden of instrumental fiat is non-resolutional, forcing the state to be the only locus for change. Mode of politics that can only assume the terms of the possible and the pragmatic. Their mode of politics trains the skills to create energy transition while marking black and native life as disposable, arbitrating white life for black and native death as proven by the defense of renewable violence per cross-sex that in turn link towards such skills. White crisis cannot check fascist crisis because it is what produces disaster in the first place. Uninhabitability can attune us to impossible modes of politics. Refusal to accept what's on the table is the only way to generate actionable practices. So there is no impacting out of the class stuff that they can see that rehearsal is key to iteration, which solves that argument above. That question of the fairness and the fairness paradox stuff is they've conceded that judges are already voting arbitrarily because of their racist things that they believe, which means that structural unfairness must come first, and you must err affirmative on the question of fairness. But they've also conceded that you should balance competition with ethics because the only way to prevent anti-black violence within debate, the burnout stuff that we're straight turning in black burnout habits under their model only reproduce the actual tactics that for black people to actualize. Now the argument about checks and balances stuff and the judges stuff is irrelevant because judges blocking 5 things that are replaced with more bad things which got done on the case stuff. The offense and the subjectivity stuff is irrelevant because it's a question of iteration over time and the ways that we produce things. Now it's a question of models of debate, not simply just this round, because they're saying that it's just a question of this round. You should force them to defend their investments into things like colonial shit, anything else absolves them of responsibility for their investments and violence. Now counter-interpretation. Firms must defend an unsustainable vision of the topic that sits in the apocalypse. Debaters create tactics for life in the face of the end of the world. The U.S. is a black and native colonies. MPI is a world market system. Decarbonization is a cultural project. And clean energy includes white ecology. Now the argument about the app not happening likely, yes it is, which is a case example like that above. But they also consider this a question of ethics first, so which means that even if there is no balance solvency, if we win that they have invested in anti-black shit, you should vote affirmative. Now the argument about racing to the marches is irrelevant because they've conceded that marches are the form of black debate. You are arbitrarily over-limiting black debate, which is a kind of spatial control fantasy argument that we made. It proves that argument. Now the predictability stuff is irrelevant because they have conceded that we are core of the topic. Apocalypse is what animates it, which proves that apocalypse is the stasis point, not their state, not the resolution. And the intellectual elitism stuff is not just a question of epistemology, which is why we have a praxis that answers that. The argument that they have made about the fantasy of the TVA is irrelevant because they've conceded that there's no TVA in a world of fascism, anything else that absolves the conditions of fascism because the TVA is not possible in a world where Trump has gutted the EPA. They also could not point to anything that they would read against the TVA, which proves there's no ground laws, and it also proves that limits are not key to discussion anyways because they would not have anything to engage with because they don't know what the fuck would go in the 1 and C. Now the argument about them moving away from oil is a question of education. They only move away from oil but do not center black and indigenous practices, which is why they would read things like plan focus and bad. Plan focus bad that they also conceded error app on limits. You should prioritize arbitrary app inclusions over arbitrary negative solutions. The counter-interpretation is hyper-contextual because they concede that they would just move the goalposts in the topic on the inter-debate. You should be highly skeptical of how genuine they are about frameworks neutrality, which also turns their offense because black and native teams will just keep doing KDK debate. It means they can't solve any of their impacts.
337.
NDT, and then case. Just pull my case flow. Okay. Is anybody not ready? Think back to 2AC Cross-Six. We asked them reasons to reject the team. They did not say reading framework is one of them, so it can never be a reason to vote negative. Not going for it, go to case. Frame this debate through 1% risk of a case turn means you vote negative on presumption and reject the 1AC's and colonial violence imposed both in and out of the space at worst. You can vote it as a solvency deficit that zeroes their ability to weigh offense insofar as they have agreed on groups in this quo. So if we're correct that their framing is bad or does not change anything that those groups in this quo, you can vote negative to endorse because we have not provided an alternative. They have mishandled the metaphorization arguments, i.e. trading rhetoric for a ballot is the link. That means it's only a question of rejecting the 1AC at face value to prevent cruel optimism on indigenous and black populations, or whether or not it functions as a solvency deficit. Filter the offense through rejoinder. This is how debate functions. If we win their outcomes or process to get to new outcomes are bad, then we have met our win condition. We do not have to affirm an alternative. That is not how debate works. We rather just have to disprove the utility of endorsing the affirmative team. The app is a move to create metaphorical decolonization. Only a risk of the link in voting negative. They have conceded the 1AC McCrinton we highlight, which is hyper-contextual, says they are a form of decolonial poetics, which creates, quote, which creates both imaginable futures that are both unexplainable but also not rooted in the repatriation of indigenous land and life. That positions weight as the intellectual savior engaging in poetic decolonization through their endorsement of the inventory. As a way out of the systems they critique, which reinforces the systems they tell you they deconstruct. Two impacts. One, tokenization. The Mozzie evidence says their metaphorization of decolonization without combating the structures they critique merely massages their ego. This is a terminal solvency deficit that zeroes case. It concludes their, quote, intellectual decolonization, and, quote, causes the university in and of itself to market decolonization as an idea to receive recognition over, but never enact. This is a form of co-option that they have confusingly agreed with in the 1AR. They agree that the university is bad. They agree that the academy is bad, but then they come in here to present the ideas. If we have conceded that, that is a form of co-option that they engage in, which means they never actually achieve decolonization. Cruel optimism is external offense. Their gestures at structures of inclusion and combating them without ever explaining how voting AF does that means their decolonial poetics is never rooted in the repatriation of indigenous land or life, despite claiming to. Neg, the term, although framed through methods of indigeneity, does not only affect indigenous folk. Rather, think about the agentic capacity we have outlined for fossil fuels in the state to enact violence. Also, the way that renewables are built in the status quo. Those structures of colonialism and capitalism cause indigenous and anti-black violence they have agreed on. It is the entire inherency claim of the 1AC. So if we win that they do nothing about this, you can vote negative basically on presumption. We did not drop the 1AR refusal. They basically double turned themselves because they reinvest in academy that was done above. The role of the ballot is to signal to tab room who won the debate. They have no line by line on this question, which means you neg, i.e. debate is first and foremost a game proven by going for technical concessions, which means the ballot ought to other things on the debate. They said arguments about debate collapse. This cannot be cross-applicable to the term because it's about how the affirmative has implemented their politics. They said a bunch of things about alt movements happening now. This is our offense, i.e. it proves they endorse this quote, which is what voting negative would do. Nothing about voting AF makes these movements better. Rather, they've said that the movements are an example of their politics, and they have said nothing about the way they change those movements. Decolonization is more than just land back that was done above. The unmooring of ways was also turned above. It is a solvency deficit. If we are correct that they don't do anything to challenge the structures of colonialism and capitalism, that means that they don't unmoor ways embedded in whiteness. There is no internal link turn. The 2AC was light on this, and this was also new. Filter this at the end of the day through rejoinder and the link debate that I have explained above. The material stuff, the two examples in the 1AR is our argument about movements in the status quo. The tokenization is our offense plus their argument about how some indigenous folk are counterinsurgents. A new 1AR argument you should strike anyways. We are not endorsing that all indigenous people in a vacuum in every action that they take. Rather, we are just saying if they don't solve case or there is a risk that they reinvest in those systems by not combating them, then it is a reason for you to vote negative. The tribal activism and state stuff working now, it's an heresy. Take out to the AF approves try or die. Coalitions of McChem tries in Canada brought a 50% share, and Clearwater Foods gained full ownership of Clearwater's offshore fishing licenses, which guarantees them food security. The Yurok tribe worked within local communities, state and federal authorities to build a salmon sanctuary and combine the largest dam removal project in U.S. history to revitalize their native lifeways. They've listed other groups in the scroll explained above that if we're correct that they're solving for mortar death at extraction sites now, that proves our sovereignty is good. And McKibben offense. Remember, the 2AC dropped McKibben. This is terminal defense. Even if you don't buy anything else I've said this whole speech, this is game over. McKibben says that McKibben is a reason that both legalism and the state is good, and a reason that that people in the status quo are using state to combat exclusions. McKibben says things like shaming campaigns and lawsuits are consumers pushing back against these companies and causing these companies to change their behavior. It is an understanding of why profit motives are a reason that extraction decreases insofar as if consumers do not buy things from the companies that are doing these negative things. It means the companies, it proves, and the McKibben evidence says in the status quo, it proves that the companies switch their supply chains and what they do. It says Tesla stop relying on mining and abroad. It is also a broad defense of legalism in the state, which is the reason why the status quo solves their offense, and the movements that I said are in status quo use that avenue.
327. Anybody? Not good. Wrong, 2 and R. The only thing I have to win is that the affirmative outweighs. It definitely does. The role of the ballot is not specifically about endorsing who won or lost on time room, but they're conceding that we have the only way for you to be able to adjudicate who won and lost this round is about who's able to stay uninhabitable and not trying to reconstitute and make a world that is already predicated on native and black genocide, sustainable, that within itself recreates all of their impacts because they're not able to solve for the core concepts, they're not able to solve for any of the core impacts of being able to solve climate change that was in the process earlier in the speech. We have to earlier in the speech they kicked out a team into that say that we don't get cross applications. So I'm going to extend white crisis here. You should not roll over and already concede to liberalism. You should not roll over and concede to the demands for the state to be able to petition for things like the state because we've already proved that it does not do anything in the world of an apocalypse where climate change is not going to get better. It's not going to get better in a world in which we are already trying to constantly remake the world instead of imagining ways to stand inhabitable and have practice to respond back to it. We have provided multiple different examples. The Great Dismal Swamp where Black and Native people were able to come together in the swamps of North Carolina and organize against doing things like providing things for each other and making that space livable for them and other people, but also they literally threatened to shoot the governor of North Carolina. I know this contextualization sounds new, but it's not. It's been in every single speech, and it's a reason as to why you should try or die after, because they have said over and over again that we have no practice to be able to solve back to any of these things, but they have conceded all of the examples that we have given that says that the app is not just about poetics and the app is not just about AFEC, but we've said that number one, any office that you buy about AFEC being bad, we have said that AFEC is necessary for every single movement, which filters all of their offense. They have also conceded the liberalism debate, which pretty much filters all the offense that they go about posturing towards state reform is good, because we have said that liberal acquiescence and rolling over onto liberalism does not solve because it only capitulates to the liberal order and also does not solve for Trumpism. They have not answered any of that offense that has said that it does not matter even if they are doing something in the interim. They're never able to escape the world as it is, because it's predicated on Black and Native death, which is gratuitous. All liberalism offenses don't check out on supposed technical possessions or drops into 2 and R flags because they have not contended with the larger thesis level that we're making about liberalism, which implicitly impacts defense or things like lawsuits or shaming campaigns with the McKinnon card, because it all proves all of our inheriting office is true, because Trump's style fascism is running rampant now. Deportations of indigenous Black people who are seen outside of the bounds of the law, and Drew Baby Drew proved that. Extractivist violence is here. Their attempt to wish away these with shaming campaigns is irrelevant because it only reproduces violence forms of statecraft that rely on the dispossession and disappearance of Black and indigenous bodies. All of this preventative intervention must happen, and our impacts are real. It's only a question of which strategy is good. The NEC has not proposed a strategy, which means it is to try or die act, especially when they've double dropped preemptive acquiescence, which proves that we capture all their offense because organizations like the EPA and universities are rolling over the right of the academy, and it's talking about the ways in which we constantly have to remake new language through rehearsal that answers it. Endorsing, you say that the app only endorses the scope because we haven't provided practices that answer to that. Above, we're in line with those movements that we have said, and they have conceded that there is no alternative, which means it's try or die out because our impacts are outweighing. You have no impact calculus coming out of the 2NR except for this stuff about saying that we totalize indigenous experiences. We are saying specifically that it is not good to concede to liberalism. That was the sellout argument that was in the 1AR. It does not matter who is doing it. The app has provided an unflinching paradigmatic analysis of how you should be able to respond back to those things. So it doesn't matter. There's no impact. Wrong 2NR.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Good.
No, save my hands when I write this.
Yeah. I started putting my hoodie like on my computer so it doesn't.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
We sent a card out.